Hey, HannahMouse1 here. Welcome to a comprehensive beginner's Scratch tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to make a basic Fruit Ninja style game in Scratch, and if you're the sort of person who just doesn't gel with video tutorials, I totally get that. I was that person for a really long time. There'll be a link in the description to a written document with a step-by-step guide of everything that I cover in this video. But for everyone else, I also want you to go down to that description and click on a link to the blank version of this project. It will contain all of the sprites, backdrops and sounds, but none of the code, so you can easily follow along with me as I talk you through this project. So head on over to that, hit the remix button, and let's jump in. So let's start with the sprite called Fruit Sprite. This is going to contain all of our game logic. The first thing I want to do is set up a message that will start the game loop. Head on over to the events tab and drag in the when green flag is clicked block. This block and anything we attach to it will run as soon as we start the game. However, we don't want to use this to start our gameplay loop because later we'll be adding in a start screen and we'll want to restart the gameplay loop when you fail and restart the game. So I'm going to make a new message. To do this, drag in the block that says broadcast message 1, click on the drop down and select new message. Let's call it play. Attach this to our green flag block and drag in a when I receive block. Selecting our new message play. We can attach all of our game logic to this message receiver. From here, first drag in a forever loop and into that a create clone of myself into this loop and a wait 1 second block below that. This creates a new instance of the fruit sprite every second. Now we can start giving these clones some logic. Let's start with getting them to hide and show correctly. Add in a when I start as clone script and go to the looks tab. Add a hide block to the green flag script and a show block to the when I start as a clone script. Now let's get it appearing in the right place. Go to the movement tab and add a go to X position, Y position block to when I start as a clone script. The Scratch stage's coordinates go from -240 to 240 along the X axis, or left to right in lay terms, and from -180 to 180 along the Y axis, or bottom to top. We want the fruit to start at a random position along the bottom of the screen, so we can set the Y value to be -180, which is the lowest point on the screen. And to make X random, go to the operators tab and drag in a pick random blank to blank block. Set the values to be -240 to 240, which are the X coordinates for the left and right edges of the screen respectively. Next, we want to get these fruits to jump up into the air. Let's start by making some variables. Click onto the variables tab, then click make a variable. Make sure to select for this sprite only and call it this_xvel. All of our for this sprite only variables will start with the phrase this underscore so that we can easily tell them apart from the others. Make another for this sprite only variable called this yvel. Let's sort out the Y or vertical movement first. Add a set this yvel to block to our when I start as a clone script. Add another pick random blank to blank block to this and set it to be 15 to 20. We're now going to create a basic movement system. For this, we're going to make a custom block. Go to the My Blocks tab and select Make a Block. Into the block name, type Movement Gravity. Add an input and call it Gravity. Make sure that you select Run Without Screen Refresh, which will make sure that this entire code will run in a single frame, and click OK. This will automatically add a define block to our project where we can give this block some functionality. Add a change this yvel by block and drag the gravity value from the define block into the input slot. Add a change y by block under this. Go back to the variables and drag this yvel into the input slot. We want each clone to run this script every frame, so go to the control tab and add a forever loop to our when I start as a clone script. Then drag in our movement block. The gravity input should be a negative number that is close to 0. The smaller or further from 0 it is, the faster the fruit will fall. So -3 gravity will fall faster than -1. For this, let's use -0.7. Now let's sort the X velocity. Drag a set this xvel2 block here between where we set this yvel and the forever loop. We could set this to be completely random, but ideally, fruit that start near the edges of the screen will move faster towards the center than those which are already starting in the center. We can do this with some basic maths. Drag an addition operator into the input space. Drag a pick random blank to blank block into each side. Then set the right hand one to be -5 to 5. For the left hand one, drag a division operator into each side. Add an X position input block into the numerator of each division. For the denominators, set the first to -30 and the second to -35. Now go back to the define block for the movement script and add a change X by block to the end. Drag this xvel into the input slot. See, the fruit now bounces across the screen in arches of varying sizes. However, see how the fruit are collecting at and sliding along the bottom of the screen? To fix this, we'll need to go back to the control tab and drag in another when I start as a clone block. To this, add 2 wait until blocks. Then add a greater than operator to the first and a less than operator to the second. Add a Y position input block into the left hand side of each of these operators. Into the right hand side of the first, put -170, and into the second, put -175. This means that any subsequent code will only run after the fruit has bounced up past the Y position -170, then fallen back down to -175. End this script with the delete this clone block. The fruit now disappears when it reaches the bottom of the screen. Now we can start making this actually playable. For this, we'll need to make 3 new variables. The first is for this sprite only, which we'll call this state. This will say whether or not the player has managed to slice the fruit or not. Then we want 2 for all sprites, the first called lives and the second score. Under the when I receive play block, set score to 0, set this state to 0, and set lives to 5. Clones inherit for this sprite only variables from the parent sprite or the sprite that they are clones of. By setting this state to 0 in the parent object, it will start at 0 for all of the fruit clones as well. Go to this when I start as a clone script, add an if statement around everything after show and before the forever loop. Drag an equals operator into the condition of the if statement and drag a this state input into the left hand side of this operator. Set this side to equal 0. What this is going to do is when we slice the fruit, we're going to need a second clone, but we don't want it to go to the bottom of the screen like the fruit would do initially. This will make sure that that doesn't happen. It's a bit boring for the fruit to always be an apple, so let's mix things up a bit. Add a switch costume 2 block to the start of the if statement. We want the sprite to randomly switch to costume 1, 4, or 7, which we can do with some more maths. Drag a minus operator into the input space for the costume. Set the right hand side to 2, and into the left hand side drag a multiplication operator. We'll set the right hand side of this to be 3 and the left to pick random 1 to 3. The fruit will now be selected randomly. Let's make it so we can cut the fruit. Add an if statement to the end of the forever loop right after the movement block. We need this part of the code to run if 3 conditions are met, so drag an AND statement into the condition of the if statement and then another into the left hand condition space. Go to the sensing tab, drag a touching mouse pointer condition into the first space and a mouse down condition into the second. Set the final condition to this state is equal to 0. Within this if statement, we need to first set this state to 1, then change score by 1. Now we want this single piece of fruit to split into 2, giving each piece a slight change in momentum to create the impression that you've sliced it apart. Add a set this xvel and a set this yvel block into the loop. Go to the operators tab, drag a multiplication operator into both of these. Set the second value in the set yvel block to be pick random 1.5 to 0.6. Then set the first value in the set this xvel to this xvel, then the second value to 0.7. Drag a this yvel input into the empty value in the set this yvel block. We want to create another clone to represent the other half of the fruit. So drag in a next costume block, then a create clone of myself block. Then copy the code from the set this xvel block up to and including the next costume block, changing the value in the set this yvel to 1.3 to 0.8. Now go back to this script where the clones get deleted and add an if statement after the second wait until function and before the delete this clone block. Set the condition to this state is equal to 0 in this statement, change lives by -1. This will cause the player to lose a life if and only if they missed a piece of fruit. Let's add a new mechanic, bombs, which the player will want to avoid clicking or else they'll lose a life. First there'll need to be a chance for a bomb to spawn instead of a piece of fruit. Go to where we set the initial costume for the fruit and move this into the else part of an if-else block. Set the condition to read if pick random 1 to 5 is equal to 5, then within the statement switch costume to bomb 1. We don't want the player to lose a life when the bomb reaches the bottom of the screen, so let's add a check for that. In the script which deducts a life, drag this condition into an AND operator, drag a NOT operator into the other condition space, and then an equals operator into that. Drag a costume name input into one side of this and into the other type bomb 1. Now let's get this to blow up. Go to where our script detects whether a clone is touching the mouse and drag everything within this if statement into the else part of an if-else statement. The condition of the if portion of the statement should state if costume name is equal to bomb 1. Within this, the first thing we need to do is change some variables. Set this state to 1, then change lives by -1. We also want the bomb to pass through 6 frames of animation. To do this, go to the control tab and drag in a repeat loop with it repeating 6 times. Add a next costume block to this loop. This will cause the costume to change once per frame for 6 frames. After this, we want a very short delay before the clone deletes. Add in a wait 0.01 seconds block and then a delete this clone block. The bomb will now deduct a life and explode when clicked. Now let's add in a new life object. Go to where the costume is selected and drag the entire if-else statement into the else condition of another if-else statement. Drag an AND operator into the if condition. We want the first condition to be if pick random 1 to 5 is equal to 5 and the second to be if lives are less than 5. And into this function, switch costume to life 1. We also don't want the player to lose a life for missing this, so go to the code that checks whether the player has missed a piece of fruit. Take the costume name is equal to bomb 1 condition and add it to the first condition space of an OR function. Set the other condition to be costume name is equal to life 1. Now, let's go back to the code that detects whether the clone is touching the mouse. Drag the if costume name is equal to 1 else statement into the else portion of another if else function. Set the condition to read if costume name is equal to life 1. Pause. Before continuing with this tutorial, I want you to try and fill this function in by yourself as it is very similar to the coding that we've already covered with the bomb. We want this to add 1 life, play 5 frames of animation before deleting the clone. So go hit that pause button, give it a go, then come back to see if you did it like I did. Welcome back, let's see how you did. So this section of the code should be very similar to that of the bomb. We should set this state to 1, then change lives by 1. We then need a repeat loop that repeats 5 times, and this loop should contain the next costume block. Then wait 0.01 seconds and delete this clone. How did you do? Did you manage to do it? Did you understand any of the mistakes that you made? Now we should make it so that the player can actually lose the game. Drag in another when I receive play block, add a switch backdrop to block and select gameplay. Then add a forever loop, and within this loop add an if statement. The condition should read if lives are less than 1 then, and within this loop we want to send out a new message. Like we did for play, drag in a broadcast block from the events tab, then from the drop down select new message and call it end. Then go back to the looks tab and add another switch backdrop to block, this time switching to end screen. And then we need to stop all of the forever loops, so go to the control tab and add a stop other scripts in the sprite block and a stop this script block. This will cause the game to display a game over message and for now completely stop. We can give this page some more functionality later, but first I want to add in the start screen. First find our when green flag is clicked block, remove the broadcast play block and instead add a switch backdrop to play screen block. Now we can add in a play button. Go to the play button sprite and drag in a when green flag is clicked block and then add a show block. Then have it go to 0 minus 66. Then add in a forever loop and into this an if else function. The condition for this should be if touching mouse pointer. We can use this to create a nice mouse over effect for the play button, which is important for player satisfaction. Go to the looks tab and add a switch costume to play selected block to the if portion of the if else function. Then set the brightness effect to 15, then set size to 105. Now if you right click the switch costume to play selected block, you can duplicate these 3 blocks and put them into the else function. Here switch costume to play deselected, set brightness effect to 0 and set size to 100. Now add in a when this sprite is clicked block, and to that add in a set lives to 5 block from the variables tab and a broadcast play block from the events tab, a hide block from the looks tab and a stop other scripts in this sprite block from the control tab. We now have a functioning play button. However, it is a bit jarring how suddenly the game starts, which means the player is likely to miss that first fruit. To fix this, go back to the fruit sprite and find the code that spawns in the clones. Add in a wait 1 second block before the forever loop. We can also remove this set lives to 5 block from this, as the play button now does this automatically. We can now really easily add in a replay button to the game over screen. Go back to the play button sprite and add in a when I receive end block from the events tab. Duplicate everything from show in the when green flag is clicked script and attach these blocks to the new when I receive end script. We need to change some values. So for the go to block, change the Y value to minus 90 and set this switch costume block to reset selected and this one to reset deselected. Now let's set up some UI to display lives and the score. Click over to the UI sprite and start off by adding a when green flag is clicked script, and to this adding a hide block from the looks tab. Now we want to create a custom block, so go to the my blocks tab, click make a block and type delete into the block names section. Click OK. Add a delete this clone block to the new define script. This will allow us to use the delete this clone function in the middle of a script when it could only usually be placed at the end, and thus in a single script we can delete any clones without them running the code, while the parent object, which cannot be deleted, will simply run the code in full. Add in a when I receive play block from the events tab, and to this add our new delete block. Then add a go to xy block, setting the values to x minus 217 and y 155. Now we need a new variable. Set it to for this sprite only and call it this underscore value. Set a this value to 1 block to our play script. This will allow us to give our clones custom behaviors. Now we need another custom block, call it clones, and make sure that run without screen refresh is selected. To the definition add a repeat loop with it repeating 5 times. Within this loop add a create clone of myself block and a change this value by 1 block. This will create 5 clones of the UI sprite, with each one having a unique this value that we can use to refer to each of these clones. Add this new block to this when I receive play script. Now let's give these clones some functionality. Add in a when I start as a clone block. To this add a show block and an if else block. Drag an equals operator into the condition space and then a this value block into one side. Let's set the other side to 1. In the if portion of this statement add a switch costume to life icon block from the looks tab. This will cause the first clone to display a heart icon indicating that the following UI is a lives counter. Then add another if else function to the else portion of the statement. The condition should be if this value is equal to 2. In the if portion of the new statement set x to minus 184. Then add a forever loop, and in this add a switch costume to block from the looks tab. Into this add a lives variable input. This will make the second clone display how many lives the player has left. The rest of the clones need to display the score, which will code into the else portion of this function. We'll also need a set x to block here, but we're going to need some maths to set the x position of each clone. Drag a plus operator into the input space, then drag a multiplication operator into the first of the input spaces. Into the first of these input spaces, add a this value input, and then write 27 into the second and 85 into the third. Now add a forever loop. This will handle our costume changes. Add an if-else statement into this loop. Because we're only using 3 values to display the score, we can't accurately display any numbers over 999, so we want to add in a check for this. Add a greater than operator into the condition space. We want this to read if score is greater than 999 then. In this, switch costume to 9. Add another if-else statement into the else function. Here we want to check whether the score variable is large enough to need the relevant clone to display it. For example, if the player's score is only 15, then only 2 clones are needed to display the value. Drag a less than operator into the condition space. We're going to need some more maths to get the appropriate value for this. Drag a minus operator into the first input space, then another minus operator into the first input of that, and another into the second input space of that. Drag a this value operator into the first input space, into the second, type 3. For the third, we need the length of operator with score as the input for that. We need to set the last input space to 2. This gives the position of the appropriate value for the clone to display. We need this to be set to less than 1, as this would indicate that the score value is too short for the clone to be needed. Into the if portion of this statement, add a switch costume to block. This means that a score of 5 would be displayed as 005 and a score of 25 would be displayed as 025. Into the else portion, add another switch costume to block, and into the input, add a letter blank of blank operator. Into the first of these inputs, copy the this value minus 3 minus length of score minus 2 value from the if else condition. The second input should be score. And now we want to handle the UI for the game over screen. We want it to delete lives counter and display your score in the center of the screen. To do this, drag a when I receive end block from the events tab. To this, add an if else block from the control tab. Add a less than operator with a this value variable as the first input and a 3 as the second. Add a delete this clone block to the if portion of the statement. Add a go to xy block into the else function. The y value we can set to 26, but we'll need some basic maths to correctly set the x position. Drag a multiplication operator into the x input space and then a minus operator into the first input space of that. Add a this value variable into the first input space, type 4 into the second and 27 into the third. This will use the clone's value to shift the clone along the appropriate amount. Now let's add in a few quality of life improvements. The first is that our lives counter can only display a single digit number, so we want to add a check to make sure that the number of lives never exceeds this. This is already extremely unlikely, as the extra lives only spawn if your lives drop below 5, but we can add an extra check when the lives are added. Return to the fruit sprite and find this script where the lives get added. Add an if function between change lives by 1 block and the repeat loop. Add a greater than operator into the condition space and add a lives variable into the first input space. Set the other side to 9. Within the function, set lives to 9. This will cap our lives to be a single digit. Next, we want to have the game speed up that the longer that the game runs to ramp up the challenge for the player. First, we need a new variable for all sprites called timer. Now add in another when I receive play block to our fruit sprite, then set timer to 1. After this, add in a forever loop, and within this loop, wait 5 seconds, then change timer by 0.2. To have this actually speed up the gameplay, find the forever loop that creates the fruit clones. Drag a divide operator into the wait block within this forever loop, and add the timer variable input into the second input space. To add a bit of random variation to spawning, add a pick random blank to blank block into the first input space. Set the values to be 1 to 3. You might notice that the fruit sometimes collides with the edges of the screen. This is a result of the feature of Scratch that prevents sprites from going off screen, and we need a workaround for this. Find the define block for our custom movement script. Add an if statement to this with a greater than operator as the condition. Drag an abs of blank block into the first input space. The abs, or absolute value of a number, represents the size of a number regardless of whether it's positive or negative. For example, both 5 and minus 5 have the absolute value of 5. Drag an X position input from the movement tab into the input space of the abs block. We need the full condition to read if abs of X position is greater than 240. Within the if statement, add a hide block. This will cause the fruit to disappear when they go off the side of the screen. I also want to add a mouse trail effect when the mouse button is held down. Go to the mouse trail sprite and add a when green flag is clicked block, and to that attach a hide block. This ensures that the mouse trail sprite is not initially visible. We then need a when I receive play block. To this, add a forever loop. Within this loop, add a go to random position block from the movement tab, and from the drop down of this block, select mouse pointer. This will cause the mouse trail to actually follow the mouse. Now add a when I start as a clone block, then go to the looks tab and add a show block and a go to back layer block, and set size to 100% block. Then add a repeat 5 times loop. Within this loop, add a change size by -20 block from the looks tab. After the loop ends, delete this clone. The mouse trail will now fade out and disappear. Go back to the fruit sprite and find the script with the forever loop that ends the game if the player loses too many lives. Add another if statement into the forever loop, setting the condition to be mouse down. Add a create clone of my self block into this loop and from the drop down select the mouse trail sprite. This will create a trail that follows the mouse whenever the mouse button is held. Another small bug that you might have noticed is that some fruit stays on the screen after the game ends. This is a really easy fix. Still on the fruit sprite, add a when I receive end block and to that a delete this clone. This is enough to resolve this issue. Now let's move on to sound. Sound adds a lot of impact and juiciness to your game and shouldn't be overlooked as part of the game dev process. Let's start with all of the sounds for the fruit sprite. Go to the script where these clones respond to touching the pressed mouse. In the costume name is equal to life 1 function, add a set pitch effect to 0 block and a start sound coin block from the sounds tab. Then in the if costume name is equal to bomb 1 function, add another set pitch to 0 block and then start sound crunch. The sound for cutting the fruit will be slightly different. As this is a sound that we played a lot of times in quick succession, it would get very annoying very quickly. To circumvent this, we'll do something called pitch shifting, which means that the pitch that the sound is played at will be slightly different every time. Start by adding a set pitch effect to block into the else portion of the if costume name is equal to bomb 1 else statement. Add a pick random blank to blank block into the input space with the value set to -15 to 15. To add some further variety, we'll also randomize the sound that's played. Add a start sound block after the pitch effect block. Drag another pick random operator into this with the value set to be 1 to 3. We also want to have a sound when the player misses a fruit to indicate that the player has made a mistake. Find the if statement that detects whether the player has missed a fruit. To this, add a set pitch effect to 0 block and a start sound crunch block. That's it for the fruit sprite. Now go to the play button sprite. Simply add a start sound slap 1 to the when this sprite is clicked script. And mechanically, that's our project complete. One final bit of preparation before we publish our project, the thumbnail. The way that thumbnails work in Scratch is that whatever is on the screen when you save and close the project for the final time is saved as the thumbnail, a mechanic that we can use to our advantage to display a custom thumbnail. Go to the thumbnail sprite. The only code that we need here is a when green flag is clicked block and a hide block. Make sure that the sprite is at position 00 and click the show and go to front layer blocks in the looks tab. This will ensure that the thumbnail takes up the entire screen but will hide when the player actually starts the game. Now hit that orange share button and you are done. Congratulations. Take a moment to reflect on how much coding you actually did because it is actually quite a lot. You should be really proud if you made it this far. And apart from that, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you did. It lets me know that this is something you want to see more of. If there are any other games that you'd like me to make tutorials for, let me know in the comments or in the Discord, which is linked down below. And I'll see you next week with another video. Bye!